agriculture is what we've been covering, thinking about the idea of, we're running out of usable land. We have some polluted land that's still available, and they're working on that. They're working on remediating that. We'll talk about bioremediation, phytoremediation. That's our last topic. But there's a lot of concern if you talk to people that are in the agricultural realm that we just aren't going to be able to handle the increased population, and food securities are a real thing. One of the proposed ideas is to start moving indoors for growing crops, and that especially when you think about areas like with our latitude here, we just don't have a long summer. Kind of makes sense that we could take advantage of growing indoors. And so the NMU, we do have a couple of different programs for that. There's the Indoor Ag Minor, Indoor Ag Associates, and then a Bachelor's of Science, Controlled Environment Agriculture degrees. And so this is a program that we developed over a couple of years, and right now you're looking at the newest addition to the indoor ag labs down in the Jacob Eddy complex. These are called the Flex Acres, I think, is that how the nickname for these Flex Acres. So this is a company called Fork Farms. By the way, I have no connection to them. I'm not profiting off of any of this. I'm not trying to sway you into anything like that. It's just we developed a partnership with Fork Farms really early on when we were developing the Indoor Ag Associates program. And you can link these together and create, massive vertical farming systems in like daisy chaining them. They also sell if I can advance. Can I advance? They also sell that top left image is called the Fork Flex Farm, where it has a central light in the middle, and then you put in your plants. So there's the light, and then you put in your plants, and then you close it around the light. So it's all the kind of that picture, the second picture I'm trying to show how it all wraps around the light. And so very different design, but we really liked the data they were getting in terms of their yield they can get from this. And so we invested in that initially. And then the most recent thing is their way to ramp it up into the Flex Acres. And so right now, when I look in the literature and look at some of the trade documents, it seems like vertical farming is what they're really zooming in on in terms of potential. Greenhouse growing is also another thing, but it seems like the vertical farm idea is really gaining attention, mainly because you can put a lot of plants in a very small square footage, and the yield is going to be really quite nice. So there are a lot of different hydroponic systems when you think about indoor growing. You can do indoor growing in soil too, of course, but a lot of it has shifted into hydroponic of some sort. And if I'm sure some of you might have played around with hydroponics at some point, perhaps, but the program that we have in the Jacob Eddy labs, they do the nutrient film, and they do several others, including they're doing aquaponics with, is it prawns? I think the last I heard they were working with prawns instead of fish, but having the prawns in the tank and then the plants floating on the surface in a sustainable loop system. And so this idea of getting into the hydroponics, of course, plants didn't really evolve to grow in, I mean, crop plants anyways, they didn't really evolve to grow in water systems. So that's an angle that I've been very interested in, is like how will they behave in a very artificial system. And from all of my training, you can't divorce plants from their microbes. And so to me, I'm very curious about what if we put beneficials in there, how will that help or not the plant? So I have had some grad students working on that and some undergrads in the past looking at what happens when you add beneficial microbes into the hydroponic system. You have to be careful because it's so artificial for the plants that you could potentially create more problems and need to help solve if you overwhelm the plants with too many microbes. They could get skewed and the microbes might get the upper hand to the point where it's so unbalanced it could create problems. On the other hand, there's historically, when you look at hydroponic systems and growing, they tried historically to get rid of all microbes because, of course, they're worried about pathogens getting into the system. And if you have a common watering source, then the pathogen is just kind of going through the whole system and you have problems with the pathogen overwhelming the complete crop, which is obviously pretty devastating. But I've been really pleased to see more people are looking at this idea, that there's been some publications out there where they're saying not only beneficial bacteria, but they're also they used to say mycorrhizal fungi, they don't do any kind of hydroponics. You'll never find them there, but they do grow in a hydroponic system, which I thought was very interesting. So that field we could try to use beneficial microbes because it should work somewhat similar in the sense that the beneficial should be able to help the plant fight off disease. It should help them get access to nutrients. And one of the big things is the buildup of salts, the minerals, and especially if they get out of balance, where it gets too saline, too salty, that there are known microbes that can help the plant deal with that abiotic stress in a hydroponic system. So there's really interesting work going on with that. But one of the papers that I saw published, when was this, 2024, I guess, they're really looking at the vertical farm. And one of the big things, though, to use this on a large scale, there's some key problems, which is the energy costs, the electricity costs for the lighting and potentially the heating, depending on where you are. And so right now, those two seem to be the electricity cost seems to be the main thing that they're worried about. But you might know that LED lighting, the costs of that have dramatically decreased over just a handful of 10 years or so. And so that is probably going to get better and better with that as well. But the fact that you could do this anywhere in the world, and you can do it somewhere close to where most of the people are living is real attractive. Part of this paper was looking at how do we use the lighting more efficiently, since that's one of the stumbling blocks because it's so expensive. And so they are thinking about, well, why don't we do a more dynamic lighting system where you don't have the lights continually on for a set period of time? Just like, have any of you come from a larger city where make you don't they make you pay more for air conditioning on like peak hours? They'll charge you more. And that's kind of what they're thinking here. If you can avoid the peak hours of when people are using lights in terms of the city grid, that if you could more dynamically work your lighting when you're doing indoor growing instead of just constant on for 12 hours or 18 hours. That's one of the angles they're looking at. And when they did look at that, they were finding that they can tweak the system without a loss in yield of the plant matter. And of course, you don't want your crop yield to crash. You need to make a profit if you're running this as a business. So, um, temperature changes, light wavelengths, amounts of CO2, all of that you can manipulate as well when you're indoors. There's so much more you can manipulate when you grow plants indoors. It's kind of exciting to look at that. Here's a lovely strawberry vertical farming system. But they're saying, you could dynamically adjust light intensity, the spectrum, what colors are you giving the plants, the day length, all of that you can dynamically shift. You don't have to be always an energy hog with electricity. Of course, the temperature, airflow, CO2 levels are all controllable. Another big push right now for indoor growing is to breed plants that are more suited to that, which I think is a great angle. Looking for plants that can handle this, it's a very artificial system for sure. And that's not how plants evolved to live on this planet to date. And so getting them a little bit more suited to that through genetic manipulation one way or another, and better sensors. They're saying if we can get some better technology, better sensors, that will help too, and to fine tune how we're doing the indoor growing of crops in particular. So they said we need to definitely do more of that. And, um, this is again from the paper where they're saying, we don't always have to have constant environmental conditions, have it more dynamically adjusted. And at least their study that they did, they were finding that they could do it in a way that was not harming the overall yield in the end. So they were kind of doing a proof of concept that you can do this if you put some thought into it, and especially if you know your plant and know what it's capable of, its environmental parameters, what is it capable of handling in terms of what you end up tweaking and switching. This is taken from the paper too, where they're just looking at kind of a flow of, what could we do in terms of let's do this smarter and let's do it with trying to, the key criticism you hear from people who are not in the indoor ag arena is it costs too much money with especially the electricity. And so they're saying, well, we can approach that. We can overcome that if we do it in a smart way. And I think it's true. I think from many different angles, this can be solvable. But like the growing environment, you can see all the different parameters they're thinking about. That's one of the beauties of indoor ag. You can really fine tune and control so many of the environmental parameters. Has anyone taken an indoor ag class here on campus? Yeah, you have. Okay. So it is, I guess, one of the first things to come along that I started noticing was people got really excited about the LED lights. And not only that they're cheaper now than they were, but then just how much you can manipulate those, like the color, the intensity. And then they started playing around with that and they started figuring out, different colors have very specific effects. Unfortunately, it's not universal. From every plant behaves a certain way. You have to kind of get to know your plant, figure out how it responds to these different parameters. But the LEDs hold the potential to revolutionize horticulture lighting technology for crop production, protection, and preservation. Oh yeah, they're using it after harvest too. They're seeing that if they can, I think it's ultraviolet light is getting a lot of attention where they pulse the harvested plants with some ultraviolet wavelengths, and that seems to make them stay fresher longer as they're in storage. So that's kind of a new field that I hadn't really seen much publication on. So that looks like um, and that's something to think about when you think about the percentage of food that's lost in storage after harvest is significant. Like there's a whole field of scientists that work just on that, where they're looking at how do we extend the life of the plant after it's been harvested. Um, they're talking about helping the plant get its immune system up and running. So systemic acquired resistance is just one of the ways the plant defends itself. So they're saying even using light technology for that can definitely help. So lots of excitement in that arena, looking at how do we use LEDs and all the different spectral qualities of LED, which I think is super cool. And these are just some of the published papers: light quality manipulation to control plant growth and photomorphogenesis. They're looking at all kinds of different ideas. Blueberries, improving their nutritional quality. You know, blueberries are super good for you, right? Shaping and tuning light conditions. So these are all pretty new papers, 2023, 2022. So it's a hot topic right now, which is great to see because I think if we can get more knowledge out there on the LED lighting system, that's going to really improve the quality of the crops. This is from a paper where they're just saying, you know, why do we want to do this? So here's just a visual trying to show, you know, one of the main things like around here to have indoor ag in Marquette is that you don't have to truck the food so far. I mean, we are a pretty remote area, so having the food trucked all the way from California is not necessary if we can grow here. So that's certainly a big plus. And I don't know if you've run across anything through video clips or whatever, but they're really looking at, especially over in Europe and where else? India. They're looking at when they build like apartment complexes to just incorporate plants, not necessarily crop plants, but just to incorporate plants in the design of the building, like on the outside of the building, as well as in some of the internal spaces too. But they're really looking at how to green up the cities that they're building. And I think that's a great idea for and now they're realizing that when you have plants like on the roof or on the outside surface of the building, that it saves on heating and cooling costs. So there's an added benefit there. So they're really starting to look at a variety of different ways. Food quality, of course, we're trying to improve the nutritional density when you grow indoors. So with all that manipulation of their environment, that should be doable. Much less water is being used for sure. Whenever I go to around here, if I go to buy like cherry tomatoes or tomatoes of any kind, I guess, but I often buy cherry tomatoes quite a bit. I always look for greenhouse grown. And I mentioned this in my other class that the poor tomato plant gets attacked by like at least 100 different pathogens of some sort. And so if you have a good greenhouse growing system, there should be far fewer pests in the greenhouse if you know what you're doing. And so when I look for cherry tomatoes and the stores around here, I always look for the greenhouse grown stamp on there because I know that so many of the tomatoes you buy that are just grown out in normal conditions, they've been sprayed and soaked with a lot of different pesticides. But anyways, so the idea of food quality in terms of fewer pesticides, you're increasing nutritional density. Hopefully, if you know what you're doing, you're using less water overall. So I guess some of the major, we already mentioned the electricity costs is something that we definitely have to work on. And then the other thing too, though, is the used water. Like, what do you do with the used water after the plant has grown in it? What do you do with it? And that's another thing that cities are worried about. And a lot of, I'll show you a video either today or next or soon on there's ways to recycle and filter and rate in-house so that you don't have to burden the wastewater treatment plant with those types of or not contaminated water, but some of it could be like salty in the sense of there's extra minerals and things like that. So that's another concern. We talked to the city of Marquette people who are, thinking about these things, and they were asking us questions like that, like, what are you going to do with the water after you've used it? Which is a valid, thing to need to think about. So lots of different moving parts. But speaking of moving, thinking about where all your food comes from, I think it would be a lot more fresh if we had it here, grew it here. Have you noticed, especially right now in this time of year, if you buy some fresh fruit, how quickly it spoils, especially like strawberries and raspberries. I love strawberries and raspberries, but oh boy, if you don't eat it quick. So this is just showing some data to get you to think about the distance issue. Non-exhaustive summary. Here they're looking at what can the light do. And this is just kind of just to get an idea. But here they're, in this part of the table, you're looking at UV light, blue light, green light, the different wavelengths those correspond to. You can see that there's a variety of different plants that they're looking at. Lettuce, of course, but also broccoli, kale, soybean, cucumber. And then, you know, what did it do for the plant when they were exposed to that? So the flavonoids, isoflavonoid, anthocyanin, those are all secondary metabolites that are good for our nutrition. Antioxidant, of course, that's good. You know, so looking at how do we increase the nutrient density. Oh, interesting. That's a continuation of the table: yellow, orange light, red light, far red light. Looking at radish and tomato, cabbage, mustard, sweet pepper. So it looks like a lot of the impact is again looking at antioxidants, secondary metabolites, chlorophyll A and B content. That's interesting. Oh, okay, I'm seeing it again. Reduction in nitrate content. So there's it was back here too. Reduced nitrate. Has anyone heard about that? Nitrate in your health? It is a long-standing idea that too much nitrate, if you ingest too much nitrate, is bad for you. And here in America, they actually have regulations on that where they sample the crops, you know, of course, a subset of the crops to look for that nitrate levels in the edible portions. But just recently, well, maybe 5 years ago, they came across, there's a really nice paper published where they're saying, yeah, we might need to rethink that because now they're finding that, first of all, tracking down who made that decree that nitrate's bad for you. It was in the paper. They're like, it's hard to track down. And then when we were doing our own studies, we didn't find any impact of nitrate, any negative impact. In fact, a positive impact where they were saying it was actually helping your heart if you have a certain level of nitrate. And so I'm just telling you this to kind of put it out there to be, you might want to look into that a little bit. But I know, especially for indoor growing, there's some people that say nitrate content can be spiked when you grow indoors. But again, I haven't been able to track that down. So there's a lot of, I guess, at least from what I'm getting, there's some hearsay and gossip about it, but it's like, well, where's the data on it? So just be aware that the nitrate, there's been some recent debate on that. This is an interesting idea. This is pretty new. So this was published, when was it published? 2021, looking at this idea of how can we capture sunlight and direct it where we want it to go as we grow plants indoors. So they're saying you can create technology that is able to collect sunlight. And then they're saying with the technology that we have with optical fibers, we can then funnel that sunlight indoors so that we don't have to use as much artificial light. And so this is their smart hybrid lighting system is on the left. And they said if you have real-time controllers where they're constantly assessing the quality and intensity of the sunlight energy, that you can really fine tune that so that you can really maximize the incoming sunlight energy and not have to use as much of the LED lighting system. So that would reduce your overall energy costs. So they're trying to show in this image how they're able to collect the light and then diffuse the light over all the plants. And then with the sensor have real-time feedback versus the more standard way where you just have LED lights and work totally indoors like that with no additional sunlight. Thought that was a great idea, and that's pretty new. That was something I have not been made aware of before. So again, this is just a nice visual looking at, what are we doing in terms of LED? All the qualities here of the LED compared to traditional lighting. And then what can it do for the plant is over on the right of all the many things that have been studied and where they've collected data on this. So what's surprised, there's one paper, I don't know if it was this one, but they were saying, green light, and well, we saw that in that table. I usually we say green light gets reflected, right? That's why plants look green to our eyes. And yet they were playing around with green light and they were finding that it does increase growth, increases secondary metabolite production. So that was actually quite surprising to me because I would think it wouldn't have much impact at all because that's what's getting reflected back. Most of the green light gets reflected back, but apparently they're using some of it. At least with this data, they're showing they can get the plant to respond to the green light. So that was kind of a head scratcher for me, but kind of cool. Where was that now? Oh, here. Okay. So lots of impact. Light can have a tremendous impact on the plant, as we've been talking about previously. And then this is the idea of adding in beneficial microbes into hydroponic systems, where the mantra, for decades has been all microbes are evil, keep them away. Now they're like, maybe the microbes could be helpful. Here is looking at, this table is looking at several different studies. You can see several different plants are being studied in this review paper that they did. So they have, no standard microbe necessarily right now. You can see that people are playing around with a lot of different species, including mycorrhiza, fungi, trichoderma, different yeasts, as well as bacteria. Pseudomonas is a pretty famous one. Interesting, it's not capitalized, that should be capitalized. Pseudomonas, that genus of bacteria, we'll talk a lot about them in bioremediation because they're so good at cleaning up pollutants and they're really good in a watery system. They like being in the water. They don't mind that at all. So that's a popular pick. How to inoculate and all that. There's different strategies. Some people just do like grow up the plants and then dip the roots and then put them into the hydroponic. When my grad student Veronica did hers, she actually added it into the hydroponic medium and she would add it in on a fairly regular basis. She just didn't do a one shot and that's it. She did several rounds of it. But here, a sustainable horticultural solution to improve the quality of saffron. Saffron's like the most expensive spice out there because they have to hand pick it out in the fields. And isn't it the pistil of the flower that they extract it from, I think. So that's very precise picking. I don't think they have that, a robot capable of doing that. So yeah, saffron is I think it's the most expensive spice out there. But they're saying, hey, why don't we try hydroponics? And here they were looking at beneficial microbes, including mycorrhizal fungi. And it did improve the concentration of safranal, which is a secondary metabolite important for the saffron spice. Phenolic content went up. The corm yield was increased. So yeah, it is. I thought that was a really cool study that they were able to show that maybe we could switch into hydroponics for that particular food crop. So here they're showing, yep, you can get boosts in growth, biomass, nutrition, co-inoculation with mixed formulas. So using several different microbes seem to work better than single strain, but it depends. If you use single strains, sometimes that single strain of bacteria or whatever isn't very happy in that hydroponic system and can die out pretty fast before having any impact. So that's generally why they think maybe mixtures are a better way to go. But then you have to make sure they don't hurt each other in the process. You don't want them killing each other. You can cut mineral fertilizers by up to 80% without yield loss. So again, just showing that that could be a way to decrease the spent water issue of being too salty. If you can tweak it so that the beneficial microbes are really helping. Challenges remain, variable results, yes. No standard protocols, yes. And low stability, yes. So there's definitely a lot left to research and regulatory barriers. Yeah, there's always that. So there's a lot left to do, but I've been really happy or excited to see that so many different scientists are getting into this because I think it could really help with plant production in hydroponics. So these are just some examples of some of the other papers being published. I think these are 2023 and 2024 publications, so pretty new. A plant probiotic, actinomycete. So yeah, they're getting into it. So one of my grad students, Veronica, this is from her PowerPoint presentation when she defended her thesis. And so she was looking at a mixture of plant growth promoting microbes, and she was working in an aeroponic system. This was back when aeroponics was kind of new to food crops. So that's where you have the roots suspended and you have the hydroponic solution misting the roots on a set basis. And then, the roots kind of the water drips off and then it'll mist again. And they're getting way into it. They're looking at misting droplet size and what's the right size. And so they're really starting to think about this. It turns out also that aeroponics is a good way to go for root crops, apparently. So apparently like potato production in hydroponics, aeroponics works better. So they think that intermittent spraying is just so healthy for the roots that root crops really kind of are really happy under those conditions. So I think we're going to see more of that happening. But otherwise, aeroponics is kind of a fringe type of hydroponic, and I don't see a lot of those systems in play. But so this is her slide set. She was raising the point of, when you look at soil-based agriculture, it's a lot of land. We don't have a lot left. We have issues with fertilization, over-fertilization, pesticides, and monoculture crops sometimes can be very problematic. And so you can end up in fields where you get lower yields, and especially if pathogens have swept through a monoculture, which is easy to do. And the quality of the soil, at least under conventional ag, can create some issues. And so thinking about, that looks like the ice caves over in Munising, or isn't there ice caves by Chatham? Right? Anyways, Eben, is that where? Yeah, Eben Ice Caves. Thank you. Um, Thinking about growing around here again, it's a real problem. Very short growing season. And we just have a lot of trucks delivering our produce, and it's not always the best quality by the time it gets here. So you look at areas similar to Marquette, and we do have food insecurity issues here. And so she's saying a short growing season plus lack of access to quality stuff equals food insecurity. She was interested in, okay, let's look at, can we do aeroponics with beneficial microbes? We were very interested in asking the question, if we inoculate microbes into the hydroponics, where do they end up? And do they persist? And do they help the plant in any way? This is with spinach. So she was investigating both what is showing up on the roots, on the surface. So epiphytic microbes are on the surface. Endophytic, of course, are the ones that manage to get inside. And she was using this mixture. So you can see it's quite a cocktail of different bacteria and fungi. And so she chose these different microbes based on a lot of research that she did in the literature, looking at what do these microbes do for the plant. And so she has a big whole table showing how each one can help with a variety of different things like access to key minerals, iron sequestration, help defend the plant, nitrogen fixing. And so she was, she had a good reason for why she picked all of these different microbes. And so we purchased these microbes from different companies, and then she had to grow them up, learn their growth pattern, and so she could keep replicating it to be able to grow them up and then spike them into the aeroponic solution at a regular rate and dose. And so she had to really get to know this group of microbes and figure them out by growing them in the lab and then trying to see if when they get spiked in, could they help? So these were some of the key things that these bacteria and fungi were well known for in a variety of different studies with different plants. And so we were trying to kind of hedge our bets, like let's pick all the ones we think can have some really good dynamics with the plant and benefits for the plant. So iron, by the way, iron is a big deal. I think I mentioned that at some point in this class. Plants have a hard time getting access to iron hydroponically too. So, oops, and then salinity, reduce the effects of salinity. So hydroponic solutions can get to saline if you're not careful. So this kind of research is, it was with the aeroponics, but she was looking to see, at if you spray this solution of microbes and the hydroponic solution, and then compare it to doing a soil-based ag production where you spike the microbes into the soil and just look at the difference when you grow the spinach in a soil system with these microbes versus an aeroponic system with these microbes. Do we see any benefits, downsides, what's going on? And so she was looking at that kind of comparison. VCT, by the way, is vermicompost tea. She also used vermicompost. Have we talked about vermicompost? It's worm poop, for lack of a better descriptor. So when worms live their life in the soil, they take in soil, they process it, and they have their own microbes in their gut. Plus, they're taking in a bunch of microbes from the soil, and then what they poop out is a bunch of microbes and some minerals. And so worms can really benefit soil systems, and their poop is like black gold. It's being sold for quite a profit lately because of so many organic farmers are really noticing its benefits. So anyways, she brewed a tea out of it. So you take the worm poop and essentially put it into cheesecloth, and then you put it into a bucket with an aerator and let it steep. And then the microbes and the beneficial nutrients seep out into the liquid. And so then you get rid of the the solids and you have your tea. And so she was spiking in some of that tea as part of the liquid for the hydroponic system. And she did it into the soil system too. So some interesting treatments that she had going on there. And then she was seeing if there were any pathogens. We didn't spike in any pathogens. We just wanted to see, is there anything showing up after her growth of the spinach? And which can happen, they can get in there. And then looking at the persistence. That was the other big thing. If you spike in microbes, maybe they'll wash out really quickly and it'll be a waste of time and money. And so can they persist through the growth cycle of the spinach? And then look at who's there and where are they. So the epiphytes and the endophytes in the root tissue. So quite the project. And I'm not going to go into her results there's a lot to it, but basically she was finding that we could definitely see persistence of microbes over time. There was presence of one pathogen that got in there, but it was she did this experiment, I think 4 different times, and only in one case did we see, but there was no visual pathogenic disease symptoms. And so she was able to show also that there's different populations of who's on the surface of the root versus who gets into the root. And that's primarily, remember, plants have a lot of impact on that. Plants decide who comes into the root tissue primarily. And so we definitely saw a big difference in who is on the root versus who is in the root. And so these are the types of experiments that are going on in the realm of hydroponics now, where they're looking at, it'd be great if we could find a mixture of these beneficials that would be easy to work with, can persist with the plant, and have a long-term beneficial impact as you grow them. And when she spiked all of them into the soil, much less, it was like it was the soil that the microbes in the soil already were so high that when we spiked in our microbes, there wasn't much of an impact. Does that make sense? Like almost like they were swamped out by the microbes that were already there in the soil. And so we knew that, for how she did her experiment, it would have to be done a little differently if we wanted to go to a soil-based system and have an actual impact. Have you heard of these for hydroponics? RotoGrow? I think our indoor egg has one system. I don't know if it's working or not. I thought it was last I heard, but I haven't touched base on this particular one. But these are like cylinders, the light's in the middle, and then the cylinders rotate. The plants are in on the inside of the cylinder, and this whole thing just rotates very, very, very slowly around the light. And they're growing cannabis this way. A lot of the videos I saw, it was cannabis that they were zooming in on. So anyone had heard of this? Yeah. So they're claiming that rotation, it makes the plants fight gravity. It's a very slow rotation. And so it keeps messing with the plants in the sense of they're like, which way's gravity? Which way's gravity? And so they're constantly getting that stimulus of trying to figure out where gravity is. And they claim that can increase yield, which I don't know. Because I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I was having a hard time finding any published papers with RotoGrow as the hydroponic tool. So, but I don't know if you noticed, you can stack them. So this is vertical farming. It's just using the RotoGrow, and you can stack them as tall as you want. And if you have a big, tall building,
Like, where's like the wall? Like, is it around it then? Or...
it's in the cylinder.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know. I mean, it's, I don't know if it's nutrient film technique that they're using? Or just, I'm trying to figure out what these are. You know, if that's how they're getting water in. Yes. My guess is it's some kind of nutrient film. Does it say on here? It was hard finding, like they didn't want to give out details, which I guess a lot of companies do that, right? Patent protection.
Yeah.
Yeah, misting it maybe. Yeah, it doesn't say in here either. I can't see it. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, all the videos, they were pretty vague about how it was working, but they were making the point that you can do vertical farming with it and that they can get great yield. Okay. The next topic I'm going to get into is actually a long one. So let's take a break and maybe we'll stop there. Because when we come back from break, we can, or if you just want to not do a official break and switch right over into your prepping your PowerPoint, we can break for that right now. This is normally when we take a 10-minute break, but why don't we just get into your PowerPoints? But I do have probably Wednesday, I'll have a little bit of time where I can talk to you a little bit about the rest of, I don't have too much more to say, but this thing is going to take me a while. You heard of this? Bee vectoring technology? I'm like, what? When I ran across that the other week. So this is a 2024. So this is a slide from a guy who owns this company where he is saying bee vectoring technology is going to be the way to go in the future of ag. So I'll talk to you about that on Wednesday probably, but it's too big of a topic right now to talk about. You need to take a break